I'm John Harrison, Executive Director of ADISA, the Alternative and Direct Investment Securities Association. I'm here with Brian Buehler, partner at Triton Pacific, and we're going to talk about private equity. Brian, start us at square one. What really is private equity?
Well, thanks, John. Brief description is it's investing in a private business that's not traded on a national exchange. So it's a pretty broad definition, and there's lots of ways to break it down, and we're going to talk about that here in the next couple minutes.
So seeing that it is so broad, give us a subset. What certain funds are of interest, and what makes one fund more interesting than another, or one firm more interesting than another?
Sure. There's 28 million businesses in the United States, both public and private, in terms of the ability to invest in different types of funds. And so when you look at that huge universe, there's various ways that different firms and different investors should look at the opportunities. At Triton Pacific, we've developed various strategies that allow us to really key in on 5 points that we look at when we're addressing any type of private business or opportunity to invest in. Leadership is really one of the largest ones. And when you look at leadership, you're really investing in the management of a business, not just the product or service. And there's different ways to approach doing due diligence on leadership. And there's no straight and fast rule on how to evaluate leadership, but as most investors should and most investment managers do, we ask questions and we seek due diligence and get third-party opinions, and we do background checks. And when you start to look and evaluate at this type of opportunity, then you very easily start to focus on the type of business that has quality leadership, that has the abilities and stamina to move that business into a profitable or exit scenario.
Well, given you've got acceptable management, how important is, say, brand to a firm in your evaluation?
Sure, brand is it's an element that's hard to identify in terms of what the consumer thinks of it. But you can study different data points. You can look at earned media. You can look at different ways to approach the strength of a brand. But it's interesting, when you look at the brand, and let's take, for example, Burger King. In 1954, was Burger King a necessity? Did the consumer need another Burger King restaurant? What Burger King did was they developed a quality product, they packaged it beautifully, and created a timeliness to their service, which allowed for customers to want to come back. You can copy or replicate formula, but you can't copy brand. And so it's important to understand what the brand means behind just the service or the product itself.
Well, say in the example you just gave, a company starts out pretty small. How important is the size of the revenue, and how do you look at that?
Sure, gross revenue is a huge factor in terms of understanding, do we want to look at a company? So let's define gross revenue, and it's simply how much does it cost to create a product versus how much does it cost to deliver that product to market. And then in particular, when you look at that revenue, does that revenue grow, or do you have a thin margin? And if there's a thin margin, then is that a value investment that our firm or investors want to participate in, both from a due diligence standpoint or an acquisition standpoint? So when you look at gross revenue and you look at the ability to grow it, it's very difficult to grow gross margin within an industry where your margins are really bookended on each side. So the value add is looking at a company, looking at management that can deliver that gross margin as a wider margin or a more profitable margin, so that those dollars then can be utilized to impact distribution and marketing of that product or that service.
So it sounds like you've got, say you have sufficient gross revenue. What about the recurrence of that revenue and the stream? How does that work? So
recurring revenues quite impactful to our decision process. And there's a couple factors you want to consider in recurring revenue. First, recurring revenue is that revenue that continues on after the first point of sale. And quite frankly, it's more expensive to find new customers than it is repeat customers. But we shouldn't just stop there. What we need to do is look at the frequency of that recurring revenue. And then that will help us understand what the opportunity is when we're looking at that particular company or that goods or services provided by a particular company.
Well, thanks, Brian. You've walked us through looking at firms and the kind of things you look at. How do you get out of it? What's the exit strategy on some of these investments?
Sure, that's a great question. It's on the forefront of myself and my partners at Triton Pacific. Prior to ever engaging in due diligence and understanding a particular business or goods or service, we're looking at how do we exit out of this particular asset, or how do we sell this particular company. And really there's three things that we consider. One is, what's the exit from a strategic standpoint? You know, who are the buyers and what is their acquisition strategy? Does this type of company, if we can acquire it and continue to grow it, is there going to be a larger company or group of companies out there that would be interested in it? And then lastly, determining what the time of that investment looks like, because we take into consideration intrinsic value as part of the investor's decision-making process, whether it's in our funds, both public or private, or the other thousands of funds out there that may or may not be available to the general retail investor. So exit strategies are critical when we're looking at which companies to buy and which companies to hold.
Great. Thanks, Brian. You've done a great job walking us through an overview of private equity. Thank you for joining us. This is John Harrison, Executive Director of ADISA, and I was here today with Brian Buehler of Triton Pacific to talk about private equity. If you'd like more information, please see our website, adisa.org or realassets.advisor.com.